Before we get started, a quick heads up. Presidents Unplugged now has merch. If you want to support the show and represent the podcast in your daily life, you can at presidentsunpluggedmerch.com. That is presidentsunpluggedmerch.com. Now, let's get into today's episode. Welcome back to Presidents Unplugged. Today we're doing something a little bit different because this episode is a Q&A special where I'm going to be answering questions from the Presidents Unplugged community about American history. Let's do this. Starting off with our first question from Jesse Wrong 722, who asked, which presidential party has had the most elected presidents in American history? Now, on the surface, that seems like it would just be a clear number. That's all it would be. But it's actually a lot more than that because it's a great way to look at the entire timeline of the United States presidency. From George Washington all the way to today, the early presidents did not always belong to parties that we think of today. George Washington was not affiliated with a party. John Adams was a Federalist. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe were Democratic Republicans, which was one of the first real political movements in American history. But as the country developed, the two-party system that we know of today started to dominate, with the Democrats and the Republicans. If you count the number of different presidents, the Republican Party has actually had the most individuals elected president at 19, while the Democratic Party is very close behind at 16. But what's really interesting is that when you add up the total years that each party held the presidency, the time in office, it's right around 96 years for both of them. This contrast comes from right around the time of the Civil War all the way to the 1930s. For this over 70-year period, we only had two Democratic presidents elected, Grover Cleveland and Woodrow Wilson. So there was a lot of little Republican presidencies in there. But then on the Democrat side, FDR was elected for 12 total years. So there's different advantages that both sides had at different points in history. Even if we had different numbers of presidents elected, the staying power was right about the same. This shows how American political power has shifted back and forth through history, and that the balance between parties has really defined the story of the presidency for nearly 250 years of our country. A great question to start us off, Mr. Jesse Wrong. Our next question comes from McAfee.ed, who asked whether Donald Trump was the only elected president who was not a career politician and instead came into office from a completely different background as a negotiator. We all know the story. Donald Trump was a businessman, reality TV host. He was a lot of things that were not politician, but he became one. And that raises the question, have there been other presidents in history that haven't been politicians beforehand? Yes. Several presidents actually came into office because they were famous war heroes. Somebody like Zachary Taylor, who became famous during the Mexican-American War, or Ulysses Grant, who was the leader and commanded the Union Army during the Civil War. Also including Dwight Eisenhower, who commanded the Allied forces in Europe and became a 5-star general in World War II. These people were not popular because of politics. They were popular because of being war heroes. That leadership through wartime made them American heroes immediately. And that popularity is what carried them to the White House. But as we know, in more recent history, Donald Trump entered the presidency from the world of business and television, which made him one of the few presidents ever who had never held elected office before running for the White House. So the moral of this question is, the presidency usually comes from the political world. We get that. That's the majority. But history has shown us that sometimes the country turns to people who make their name somewhere else, whether that's fighting on the battlefield or firing people on The Apprentice. Our third question comes from Noah Smith 63, who asked, what decision by a past president changed the future of the United States the most? I love this question, because it not only looks at the 4, 8, 12 years, I'm looking at you, FDR, that they were president and how they affected the world then. It looks at what decisions did presidents make that not only affected their time in office, but a long time afterwards. A lot of things come to mind, but I'm just going to cover the 3 decisions that I think immediately stand out. First is Franklin Roosevelt creating the New Deal during the Great Depression. When the country was facing insane unemployment, bank failures, economic collapses, Roosevelt launched a series of programs that expanded the role of the federal government in helping everyday Americans. The government was not just this side idea in trouble. It was the one that was going to help. Historians still debate today exactly how much the New Deal shortened the Great Depression. Would we have gotten out of it without the New Deal? Or would we have stayed in it forever? Obviously an exaggeration, but nobody knows. There's no doubt in my mind that the New Deal permanently changed how Americans expected the government to respond during times of crisis. You're not just going to fend for yourself, the government is going to pat you on the back and help you if you need it. Another decision that immediately comes to my mind is when Rutherford Hayes ended Reconstruction after the very disputed election of 1876. Now here's the debate. Would Reconstruction have ended if Samuel Tilden, the guy who won the popular vote, became the president and didn't lose by 1 electoral vote? If you want to know more, check out the episode, A Single Vote, the Election of 1876. All around this time and dealing with that election, Rutherford Hayes had to make some compromises and some deals. One of those deals was about Reconstruction, when Rutherford Hayes had to take federal troops out of the South. Now, why were federal troops in the South? They were trying to make sure that these newly freed slaves were able to express the rights that they were just given through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. But after Hayes made that deal to end Reconstruction and to take out federal troops from the South, for the next 100 years, segregation and Jim Crow laws were everywhere in the South. These Jim Crow laws and segregational ideas were not fully removed until 1964, 99 years after the Civil War. But here's the debate, and here's why I don't immediately blame Rutherford Hayes for this event. All around this time, it was not the Democrats opposing Reconstruction and the Republicans wanting Reconstruction. No, it wasn't like that at all. We kind of knew that Reconstruction was going to end. So even if Samuel Tilden didn't get beaten by 1 electoral vote in the election of 1876, spoilers, but under the leadership of Rutherford Hayes, Reconstruction in the South ended, leading to almost 100 years of mistreatment of African Americans. And I would argue that one decision changed the future of the United States tremendously. And my third and final decision that I'm going to cover in this question is one made by Harry Truman in August of 1945, when he decided to drop 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, killing hundreds of thousands of individuals. This decision ended World War II, possibly preventing hundreds of thousands or even millions of deaths afterwards. But that doesn't mean this decision was not controversial. That decision helped bring the war to the end. Hooray, everyone's happy. But it also introduced the world to nuclear weapons and began a new era of global politics that would spark what we now know as the Cold War. These 3 decisions that I just talked about were only examples. There's so many instances in American history of decisions covering generations and generations. But here's the point. Whether we're talking about the government holding our hand during depressions, whether we're talking about the mistreatment of African Americans in the United States for a century, or whether we're talking about dropping bombs, killing hundreds of thousands of people to possibly save millions. And while there's probably hundreds of other decisions I could have covered in this question, these, in my opinion, are the 3 decisions by United States presidents that have changed the future of the United States the most. Abraham Lincoln was 6'4". Franklin Delano Roosevelt served as president for more than 4,000 days. Those are facts. But here's another fact. The fact that Presidents Unplugged has an Instagram page. If you want updates on the show and announcements about what's coming next, follow us at Presidents_Unplugged. That is Presidents_Unplugged. I'll see you there. Our next question is from Bethany Eddy, who asks, which president might have been remembered as one of the greatest if they had made just one different decision? 2 immediately come to my mind, and those are James Buchanan and Richard Nixon. Let's start with James Buchanan. James Buchanan is often regarded as one of the worst presidents in American history. Why is this? James Buchanan just kind of let the Civil War happen. He kind of knew in his mind that the decision of slavery would probably divide our country eventually. Did he know it was going to separate the country into 2 sections that would fight each other? Probably not. But it did. James Buchanan, instead of tackling the slavery issue head on and actually taking a stance, sympathized with people in the South so many times, causing the American people not to really know what their own president believed. That's an issue. And it took a strong leader like Abraham Lincoln to actually have a stance, to be against slavery, and to fight. James Buchanan, as I said in his episode, he didn't fight. He just kicked the can farther down the road for the next guy to deal with it. And then Abraham Lincoln, who actually dealt with the slavery issue, is one of the most highly regarded presidents of all time. If James Buchanan would have taken action earlier, the entire Civil War and his legacy could have looked completely different. But the other example of this question is one that people might know a little bit better. Richard Nixon. What do we know about Richard Nixon? He's a crook. He's a liar. The Watergate scandal. But what if I told you that's not all about Richard Nixon's legacy? In my episode, Rise, Fall, Resignation, More Than a Scandal, I tried to make the point that if Nixon would not have been affiliated with the Watergate scandal, he would have had a great legacy. the Environmental Protection Agency, women's rights, having diplomatic agreements with China. Richard Nixon was winning and winning and winning and winning. And then he was affiliated with the Watergate scandal. If you want to know more, check out his episode. If Nixon was not forced to resign after the Watergate scandal, or if James Buchanan took that stronger stance in the Civil War, America would look at their legacies completely differently. Our next question comes from Molly Moore, who asks, "Who is my favorite president?" Oh my goodness, is Ty about to be partisan? No, I'm not, because my favorite president is not a partisan decision at all. My favorite president is the man, the myth, the legend, George Washington. Why is this? Is it because he's on the $1 bill? Is it because you can ask every first grader in America who the first president is, and they will say George Washington? No, but I do understand why this man is so famous. George Washington was the first president. We have presidents today that say, "Oh, I am encouraged and inspired by this guy. I'm encouraged by this president. This man made me want to be president." No. Washington had no example to follow. He had to create the norms of the presidency. And the coolest one to me is a decision that he made in 1797. The decision to step down. George Washington served 2 4-year terms to the American people, and he could have easily run for a third. I mean, he didn't have anyone to base it on. Who was going to tell him that he couldn't do it if it hadn't been done before? Washington was popular enough that he could have easily run for a third term. But Washington remembered, did we not just leave a monarchy? Don't we want multiple representatives of the American people? He taught that leadership is not just knowing when to step up, but when to step down. And that is one of the most respected pieces of George Washington's legacy. Not only knowing when to be big and strong, but also when it's time to move on. And on top of this, George Washington also fought in the French and Indian War. He fought in the Revolutionary War. He was a founding father. George Washington is one of the most foundational figures in the creation of our country as a whole. And that is why George Washington is my favorite president. The next question is from Barbie William and is extremely fitting for the March Madness season. You have to pick 5 presidents for a basketball team to face an NBA team. Who's your starting 5? Well, first off, I'm obviously including George Washington. I just told you that he's my favorite president. He's also very tall, he's a great leader, and if he can cross the Delaware, he can probably cross the court with some crazy moves. Next, 6'4" in the Wrestling Hall of Fame, Abraham Lincoln. Next is 6'3" Lyndon Johnson. This man's episode on the channel was to bully for the greater good. I can almost see him as Bill Laimbeer in the 1990s Bad Boy Pistons. He doesn't care what you think. He'll talk trash. He'll punch. He doesn't care. He just wants to win. The 4th man on this team is easily Teddy Roosevelt. He's not only our youngest president ever, but was also shot in the middle of a campaign speech and just kept going for like 90 more minutes. If this guy can get shot in the middle of a speech and keep going, yeah, I think he can play some basketball. And my number 5th pick is probably the most obvious of the bunch, Barack Obama. He's not only the only president to ever play basketball on a regular basis, but he also put a basketball court in the White House. Yeah, Barack Obama likes basketball. I think these 5 United States presidents would make a great basketball team. Our final question today comes from HeyBigSis22, who asks, when or why did I first discover my passion for American history? What a great question to finish off the episode. I discovered my passion for history in middle school. It was 7th grade when a teacher that I respected came up to me and said, "What is your favorite subject?" And in middle school, you don't want to say your favorite subject is math because that makes you a nerd, right? No, it does not make you a nerd. But I said, I don't know what my favorite subject is. But I took a United States President's book off of a bookshelf in her room and took it home. And that night, I learned all of the presidents. Some stuff about them in order, what they did. And I came back to school the next day and told her, history is my favorite subject. All it took was one look at the way the United States presidents not only shaped the time that they were in office, but also the future of America. It took that for me to see why history is so important, because it does repeat itself. And I feel like history is mistreated in the way that, as I said in the intro of this series, history is seen as a dusty textbook, but history is so much more than that. And it's so funny to look back and see me finding that spark for U.S. history in 7th grade, and now, almost 4 years later, looking back and telling you all about it in the form of the Presidents Unplugged podcast. And that is why United States history is so important. Tune in next Friday as we talk about John Tyler. When William Henry Harrison was only president for 30 days, who is this guy that just became our president? He's a traitor. He doesn't even agree with the party we elected him for. He also has 15 kids? What? Learn about him and much more next week on Presidents Unplugged. I'm Ty Svensson, and I'll see you soon. God bless. Thank you for listening to Presidents Unplugged. If you enjoy content like this, give us a follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today to be notified that your favorite presidential podcast has released new content. Now, when do we release new content? Once a month, maybe twice a year, maybe even once a year? No. We release new content every Friday at 1 p.m. for my American enthusiasts to enjoy. Come join me on our dive into making American history the most entertaining and interesting subject to learn every single week. I'm Ty Svensson, this is Presidents Unplugged, and I'll see you soon.